energy healing, part 3. So we've done 2 lessons on energy healing already. Now, I'm talking about the theory of the energy healing. There's 3 in total, and we've done part 1 and part 2. You know that there is obviously the Aya golden energy healing lessons, but that's a practical, that's a practice side of things. So I'm not counting those lessons today. Um, so in terms of the theory, there's 3, and we've done 2 already. And don't worry, we're going to do a little bit of a recap on the first 2 lessons, of course. So let's start then. You guys can see that, okay? So it's lesson 37, energy healing part 3. Interestingly enough, this is actually, you could say, the last theory lesson of the course, actually, because we've got a couple of lessons on case studies coming up, and then we've got a lesson on the free flow project itself, and then the exam lesson. So yeah, this is really the last theory lesson. So it's quite fitting, I think, to end it on the most advanced form of energy healing. So let's get going. So energy healing part 3. And by the way, this lesson is going to be, there's quite a lot of abstract thinking to do in this lesson, in some parts anyway. I'm just giving you a pre-warning. So you'll have to get your other worldly thinking cap on, I think. First of all, let's go back to energy healing part 1 and 2, just to give ourselves a bit of a recap of what's been going on in those lessons. So let's start with energy healing part 1, which we did fairly early on, October or something like that, October, November time. So in that first lesson, we talked about this list of stuff. I'm just going to run through this very quickly just to jog your memory, basically. So we talked about energy healing in terms of being an ancient medicine and how it evolved millions of years ago in earlier animals, when animals started to live in social groups and they started transferring this type of subtle energy or magnetic energy between individuals in the group. It's a way of sharing healing in a social group. So it evolved, way before even people were around, to be honest with you. And we took an example of wound healing. We went through the details of wound healing and showed how energy healing can be, or is a part of the natural healing mechanisms of the body. So this is where we introduced magnetic enzymes. Magnetic enzymes being another word for healing energy, really. It's if you look closely at healing energy, you will see long strips of magnetic fields with a programming attached to them. And those are magnetic enzymes. And we talked about the guna, of course. The lower mind has a guna, the higher mind has a guna. These are programming organs. This is what programs the healing energy. And we talked about the free flow system in the energy body. Now, we've talked about that a lot since then, haven't we? But the free flow system is the way that the healing energy or the magnetic enzymes flow around our own bodies and are able to come out of our chakras into other people as well. We talked about the mind-body effect, i.e. intention. So the importance of intention when programming energy. And, this first lesson was all about, the basics, really. So we just introduced the concept of intention healing, which is the lower mind thought process, which programs the energy with the lower mind guna. Then we did a golden energy self-healing exercise. And this is where we started moving golden energy around the body and programming it and moving it to a certain area to do a healing job in your own body. We also talked about a bit of chakra clearing as part of energy healing. And we also introduced the Free Flow Project, which is the project that we're about to start to find evidence for energy healing. All right, so that was lesson 1, basically. The basics of energy healing. Then lesson 2, a few months later, we went into the concept of non-intention healing. So we had a recap on intention healing in that lesson, but we introduced non-intention healing because non-intention healing, i.e. from our higher minds, is really mostly how the network healers is set up. That's what we're doing in Network Healers. It's a high mind operation using high mind healing or non-intention healing. So that's not activated by a lower mind thought process. It's not activated by an intention in the lower mind. That's what we mean by non-intention. So we talked a bit about the layers of programming and how, the lower mind is capable of adding a certain amount of programming to those magnetic enzymes, and how the higher mind can actually add a whole load more and therefore can be much more powerful healing. We talked about hybridization. Hybridization is the getting closer of the lower mind and the higher mind over spiritual evolution over many incarnations, and how lower mind healing versus higher mind healing can be expressed as a percentage. And any given healer could have a percentage of lower mind versus higher mind healing, and it depends on their spiritual evolution, basically. And as we go through self-realization, that changes completely, because the higher mind and lower mind come together as one in a hybrid. And then it's all higher mind healing. It's all non-intention healing after that. We mentioned the ego briefly, just to explain why quite often a higher mind will limit the amount of higher mind healing it sends through, because it doesn't want the ego in that lower mind to get inflated and make it part of its identity. Then we talked about applications in Network Healers. So we talked about our virtual tank. Remember the two-stage process: sending golden energy to the virtual tank, and then the second stage, the tank to the recipient or the healing partner. And how the second stage is always done by our higher minds, non-intention. We also went into magnetic enzymes a little bit further. And then we did some Vinaya visions and Vinaya vision exercises, which was also part of the assignment as well. And that was basically a way of gathering knowledge from our higher minds about what's going on in the healing job, and then writing it down or drawing it, basically. So the Vinaya visions is just a way of our higher minds giving us the information or knowledge about what is happening in the healing. And that was lesson 2. So lesson 1 was mainly intention healing, the basics. Lesson 2 was non-intention healing, based around non-intention healing and Network Healers. Okay, and we're all up to date there. So now we are going to talk about energy healing part 3, and this really refers to the most advanced forms of energy healing. And like I said, I'm not counting the Aya golden energy healing as part of these 3 lessons. That's a practical. So these 3 lessons are about the theory, really. So energy healing part 3. So the most advanced forms of healing. Now, as we go through this part of the lesson, I want to first of all say that a lot of this is still in the experimental stages. We've done some experiments with some of it, and then some of it, which I'll get to later, is partly theoretical. So we are developing these as we go in Network Healers. So they're in this lesson, of course, because it needs to be. But as we learn more and more about these processes, obviously the lessons will grow, and the knowledge in the lessons will grow as we learn. Types of energy healing, just so you can wrap your head around what types of energy healing we've got already. So we have intention healing, which is lower mind healing. You know that. We have non-intention healing. And in non-intention healing, there are various types. We've got higher mind healing. That's what we've learned already. So lower mind healing, we learned in lesson 1. Higher mind healing, we learned in lesson 2, which is a type of non-intention healing. Now, the 2 that we're going to learn in this lesson is called Maya healing and Akashic self-healing. So Maya healing is applying it to somebody else. Akashic self-healing, of course, is a type of self-healing, but it's a type that you use through self-realization. A person going through self-realization will use Akashic self-healing. So we'll get to that at the end. So really, this lesson, to be honest, there's a lot of information in this lesson, I have to say, but you can boil it down to two main parts: Maya healing and Akashic self-healing. So always remember that. And I'm going to do little summaries through the lesson as we go so we don't get lost. The first thing we have to talk about, whether it's Maya healing or Akashic healing, is the Maya organ. This is what creates the most advanced type of healing. So the Maya organ is an energy organ or energy anatomy organ, which grows in a person that becomes self-realized around the time of a global awakening. And that's called a day avatar. So we've talked about that quite a lot already, haven't we? A person that goes through self-realization at the time of global awakening is called a day avatar. Now, that's because self-realization itself evolves over time. So 5,000 years ago, there was a different type of avatar. In a million years' time, there'll be another type of day avatar. So it does evolve as it goes, and it sort of links in with the planetary cycles. Now, a Maya organ starts to grow in a person going through self-realization. It starts to grow around a couple years, 1 to 2 years into the process itself. And as you know, the process is a transformation because lower mind and higher mind are sort of coming together in a hybrid, but they're also transforming at the same time. And some things get left behind and some things are new. And the Maya organ is one of these things that is new. And the guna, both the lower mind and the higher mind guna, are left behind. They are removed, and the Maya organ replaces them. That's what a Maya organ is. Now, why the word Maya? First of all, the veil of illusion. Let's start at the top here. The veil of illusion. That's what Maya means. Maya is a Sanskrit word, ancient Sanskrit word, and that's what it means, the veil of illusion. And it was invented to describe the illusion of the physical universe. Now, as we've talked about lots already, we know now that the universe of form, energy itself, is created with a duality, a separation. And it's impermanent. That's what creates everything around us, but it's impermanent. As opposed to the permanence of the source. Awareness, universal awareness, is permanent. Energy is impermanent and it's constantly moving, and it's a type of illusion. Now, Maya refers to everything in the physical world which is blinding us from the truth of our true self, the truth of universal awareness. So that's what the word Maya means. And you'll understand later on through this lesson, why we call it Maya healing or the Maya organ, because it works with that veil of illusion. But we'll get to that. Now, you could say that the Maya organ is like the hands of the source. The person becoming self-realized is really the source becoming self-realized. And the source at the ninth chakra, then you could say that the source is coming from the ninth chakra in that person. And you could say that the Maya organ is the hands. It's how the source has an impact in the physical world of form. So it replaces the higher mind guna. I've told you that already. And it grows, 1 to 2 years into the process. Now, the process, what we're talking about here, is at the end of the Kundalini phase. That's when the process starts. So it's the phases of self-realization. That's the process. And it starts growing about, 1 to 2 years into that process. Now, it has many functions, which I'm going to go through in a minute. And when it starts working, you start getting these symptoms. And I'm going to go through the symptoms in a minute as well. And I'm sure many of you will recognize some of those symptoms. Now, the last thing here is that it works in a network. So this is something to remember. It doesn't work in isolation, the Maya organ. It works with lots of people's Maya organs together. They seem to function in a group. They work together in some way, basically. They're all connected. Now, let's look a little bit closer at the Maya organ. Before we even get into the types of healing, we have to just look inside the Maya organ and talk about the different parts so you understand what's going on inside the male. So the male organ is about that big and it sits around the heart area in the higher mind, and it's made of subtle energy. It's made of magnetic energy. That's why it's golden. I've made it a gold color because it's made of subtle energy. Now, in the core of the male organ, there is a non-physical part. That's the source. Anytime we're saying non-physical or non-physical reality, that means the source itself. Now, this is a bit tricky to get your head around, to be honest with you. It's the same with the ninth chakra, if you think about it. There's a non-physical core in the ninth chakra. And it's the same with the male organ, although they have two different functions. But the male organ has got this non-physical core. Now, this is difficult because non-physical means nowhere, but it also means everywhere. So it's difficult to really understand how it can be somewhere in the physical universe. But it is. There is a core there. And by the way, this concept does exist in well-known science as well. For example, a black hole. A black hole out there in space, there's these things called black holes, and their gravity is so huge that at the center, there is what scientists call a singularity. And it's a similar thing here. So this isn't a new concept, but there's one at the center of the male organ. And this is the heart of how the male organ works. It works through non-physical reality. Now, I'll come back to that in a bit. So you've also got these little funnels coming out from there because little products can be made by the male organ, like magnetic enzymes, for example. It can make anything like that, and it can come out of the center core and be funneled out through the edges. And you've got this outer ring surrounding the sphere of the processing part, or where the controls are controlling it. Okay, so let's talk about some of the functions. Now, don't worry too much about all this. Don't worry too much about some of these. I'm just putting a load of functions here so you can see that it does a lot. So it can program energy. It can program all sorts of energy. It does Maya healing, and we're going to talk about Maya healing in this lesson. Magnetic enzymes it can make, Rasaja membrane. We're going to talk about that in a minute, don't worry. And acacia flow method. We're going to talk about that in a minute. It can burn people's karma away. It can manipulate energy anywhere. It controls akashic telepathy. I don't want to go into these in too much detail right now because it will be a bit too much of a sidetrack. I just want to show that it can do all these things. It can modify the collective mind. It can actually modify the structure of the collective mind because it can manipulate energy. It can produce Kundalini awakenings in people. It can guide sleeping higher minds. It can move people around and guide them. And lots of other stuff as well, which is not really relevant to go into right now. But as you can see, it can do a lot. So let's talk about some of the symptoms. Now, when it starts coming online, you tend to, not everybody feels this, by the way, but quite a lot of people, enough people to know that it's a symptom of the male organ. Quite often you will get heart palpitations. A very fast, strong heartbeat is a very common sign that the male organ is starting to function. Now, quite often when you feel this, you'll start thinking there's something wrong and you'll take yourself to the doctor perhaps. And that's perfectly normal. And that's a bit similar to many other Kundalini symptoms, to be honest with you. And you know that heart palpitations can also be a Kundalini symptom in the Kundalini phase as well. So it's a bit confusing. But if you are in the first or second year of the process and you start getting a fast heartbeat, it's good to know that it's most likely the male organ starting to function. Some people also feel it like a pressure on the heart as well, like something's like an elephant sitting on your chest sometimes, and sometimes difficult to breathe. Like heavy breathing can go along with it sometimes. Or perhaps even, the beating can actually extend around the body sometimes as well. Has anybody else, quite a few of you know about the male organ already, of course. Has anybody else have any other symptoms apart from this? Yes. Right. Yes. So the blood pressure thing is interesting. I started measuring my blood pressure when I started getting this. I started measuring it to see whether to see what effect it was having on it, and I couldn't seem to find anything concrete. But maybe we should do more experiments to see exactly what it's doing to the material. Yes, that's right. Right. Yes, so that's that third one there, beating around the body. See, I've had a lot of that myself in the past, and it's sometimes it beats everywhere around your whole body, and sometimes it's even making your legs pulsate. And yeah, it's definitely loads in the stomach area as well, as if it's like sometimes you can even see your stomach moving, can't you? Yeah, very strange. Now, I'm going to show you a diagram next just to show you about how the Mayer organ is controlled. Now, don't worry too much about this diagram. This diagram is actually going to be part of either the third year when we increase this into a degree course, or even the PhD, because there's going to be an A PhD after the degree course. But this is a picture of a day avatar, really. This is a diagram of what's going on inside a day avatar. But at the moment, it's just to show you how the Mayer organ is actually controlled. So I'm not going to go through everything on this diagram right now, but just to point out a few things to you. So at the top, you've got the 9th chakra. At the bottom, you've got the heart chakra and the Mayer organ around it. It's not exactly in the position of the heart chakra, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so coming down from the 9th chakra, you've got the Akashic stream. Now, as we know already, we've learned in some of the other lessons that certain things come down from the 9th chakra after the Kundalini awakening phase. Source, golden energy, unlimited golden energy, unconditional love, and Akashic intuition. Now, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is the fact that there is a fourth one, and that is Mayer organ control. So that's the black line on here. So you can see the black line coming down from the 9th chakra, and then it goes past the awareness filter through the higher mind, which is the grey, thing there, and then it goes through the brow chakra, through the throat chakra, and into the Mayer organ. Basically, it's coming down the Kundalini system. This is really a drawing of the Kundalini system, to be honest with you. But the Kundalini system of a day avatar stops at the heart chakra. So I'm not sure if I mentioned this before or not, but at some point in the process, the lower chakras actually get removed from the Kundalini system. They don't get removed, but they get removed from the Kundalini system. They're no longer connected to the Kundalini system. So it stops at the heart chakra. So really a day avatar, the Kundalini system of a day avatar is from the heart chakra to the 9th chakra. But anyway, this is just to show you that the Mayer organ is controlled directly by the 9th chakra. So it's controlled directly by the source. It goes through the higher mind, but only as like a processor. It only processes the information, basically. Okay, I'm going to leave it there though, because that it's for another time. Some of these other things. Right then, so let's have a quick summary, and we can simplify all that, and basically say that network healers have or will have a Mayer organ, and it can be used for healing. Basically, those are the takeaways from that section. So now we've introduced the Mayer organ. Now we can move on to the actual healing parts. So we're going to start with Mayer healing. And don't forget, in this lesson, we just want to go through Mayer healing and Akashic self-healing. Two main applications of advanced healing, or what the Mayer organ can do. So let's start with Mayer healing. And there are two methods in Mayer healing. And the first one is called the Rasaja membrane method. Now, as I was saying before, some of these methods are in the middle of being implemented in network healers. We only started finding out about the the Rasaja membrane method maybe a few years ago, and really we're only implementing it. It's just been theory for a while, and then now we're just implementing it now in network healers. And we've tested it maybe once, I think, got some good results, but it needs a lot more testing. So we're only just implementing this. Now, the Rasaja membrane method is very important for research because it's detectable. It involves using atoms which are detectable. So that's very important because we need to find evidence for all this and show how it's working. So what is the Rasaja membrane method? Let's just take the contents of a cell. This is a cell. We have trillions of cells around the human body. And if you're healing something in the body, then the chances are there's going to be cells involved. Not everything, mind you, not everything's made of cells, but pretty most stuff in the body is made of cells. And this is just a bog standard cell and its contents. So we get the Mayer organ to send what we call Rasaja magnetic enzymes. It's a type of magnetic enzyme that does not occur naturally in the body. So the magnetic enzymes we've talked about before so far are all naturally occurring. This one is not. It's made by the Mayer organ specifically for this. So we instruct the Mayer organ to send Rasaja magnetic enzymes to the cell. And what it does is it builds what we call a Rasaja membrane. Now, this is what you can see inside the contents of the cell there. What it is it's a framework. It's a framework that gets built everywhere inside the cell. And it's like a scaffolding of sorts. And using that framework, the Rasaja magnetic enzyme, or Rasaja ME, can actually use that framework to control every process going on in the cell. It can move everything where it wants. It can increase the speed of healing by doing that. It can move things lightning speed everywhere, molecules, magnetic enzymes. It can do all that, and it can just basically take full control over everything in a cell. Another thing it does is it builds what we call Rasaja generators. Now, we don't know that much about these yet, to be honest, but we know that they are little generators that exist within the framework, within the membrane, and those generators can make molecules, atoms and molecules. It can produce stuff inside the cell. So if there's a deficiency of some nutrient of some kind, it doesn't matter. It can produce it in the cell. It can even produce glucose. It can even produce ATP, which is the energy which is used inside the cell. So if it wants to go quicker, and it needs a whole load of more energy from ATP, it can produce those molecules, and therefore it has all the energy that it needs. Now, it produces it out of subtle energy. Now, this is not so important to remember really, but if you're interested, how does it do that? Well, if you remember, the meridian system supplies every cell with subtle energy, a supply of separated frequencies of subtle energy. It has to do with the Krebs cycle. We did go through this a few times in a few lessons. The generators take that subtle energy and then make material energy out of it. They make atoms out of it. So it's kind of like generating molecules out of nowhere, basically. So how do we apply this method? Well, we put it on the SHJ form, structuring the healing journey form, because that's how non-intention healing works, of course. That's all we have to do. We have to understand it. Oh, sorry, that's not all we have to do. We have to understand it. So all the healers in the network will have to understand it and know that it's happening. But then all we have to do is put it on the form, and that should activate the non-intention healing from our higher minds. And as I said before, that is a big part of the research project, because this membrane is made of carbon atoms. So it's organic, and therefore it's going to be detectable. So at some point, we're going to be able to look into some cells and see this framework. That's the plan. So non-intention healing. So the Rasaja membrane method is a type of non-intention healing, but I think I think what you're saying is higher mind healing, the normal higher mind healing that we used before. Okay, so basically, it's mostly about speed. This is speed of healing. So, for example, we used higher mind healing with a case study that we're going to go through next week of asthma, severe asthma. And we found that it took 7 months, interestingly, 7 months to actually heal the lungs of asthma. And I'm going to go through the case study next week so we can see all the steps involved. But basically, we learned about this method because of trying to increase the speed. So if we can get the speed down to, say, a month instead, then we would rather use this method, basically. Yes, although if you think about network healers and when people join network healers, what we're kind of seeing is that most people join network healers round about at the end of the Kundalini phase of self-realization. That's just the way it seems to be organized, and that's what's happening. So there is going to be a mixture of different types of healing as as we get more and more hubs and more people joining, because the male organ only starts growing 1 to 2 years into the process. So there will be a mixture of different types of healing probably being used. All right, then. So in summary, just summarizing the Rasaja membrane method. Rasaja MEs are sent to the recipient, and a Rasaja membrane is built in the cells of the affected area wherever we're working. It's used to control everything in the cell, and it can increase the speed of healing. Those are the takeaways from the Rasaja membrane method. Moving on then to the acacia flow method. So just to remind you again, we're learning 2 things in this lesson. We're learning Maya healing, and we're learning Akashic self-healing. And in Maya healing, there's 2 methods, Rasaja and Acacia flow method. Okay, so Acacia flow method. So this is the most advanced form of healing, you could say. This is more advanced than the Rasaja membrane method. And it works in a completely different way. And I'm going to explain that now, but it works in a completely different way to your conventional type of energy healing that sends energy from A to B, from person to person. Because even the Rasaja membrane method, the male organ is still producing those Rasaja MEs and sending them over distance to another person. That's not how Acacia flow method works. And by the way, this method is purely, I'd say, theoretical at the moment. I'd say I think we're just on the point of trying to put this into practice, but we haven't yet. So I'll warn you about that at the moment. Rasaja membrane is already being implemented. Acacia flow is mostly theoretical at the moment, but we know that this can happen, and we're working on it to try and develop it. So this kind of method, you could imagine that it could be almost instantaneous. And after explain how it works, you'll see what I mean about why it could be completely instantaneous. And there are some applications, and we're still learning about what the applications really are, but you could imagine that this could work well in a group setting. But we're starting to realize that this only gets activated after the negative cycle of the process, of the self-realization process. There are different cycles to the process, and we're going to talk about the different cycles of the process later in the lesson. But we think that this only really gets activated after the negative cycle. Now, the reason why this is so different is because this works on the premise that distance is a complete illusion. Spatial dimensions is an illusion. Now, this goes back to the meaning of the word maya, the veil of illusion. All of this that we see around us is being manifested from information, from akashic information. So acacia flows and energy is manifested, and the world around us is the result. It's all a bit of an illusion, though. So let me explain more. Now, first of all, there are two types of acacia. Now, this is just to remind you, really, that there is what we call the universal acacia, which is the flow of acacia which manifests everything in the universe. There's another type, though, isn't there, that's coming from your ninth chakra into you, the akashic stream. It's just a different type. Now, we're going to talk about the akashic stream later when we talk about akashic self-healing. So for the moment, we're going to be talking about the universal type here. In the acacia flow method, we're going to talk about the bigger universal type of acacia. So let's imagine that the whole universe is on a TV screen. Everything that you can see, experience around you, the whole of the universe, just imagine it as a TV screen like that. Although it's not flat, is it? It's three-dimensional. So let's imagine it as a three-dimensional TV screen like that. Now, I have to confess, by the way, in this picture, there's a kind of a fallacy because it's looking from the outside, this picture. That doesn't exist. You can't look from the outside at all. There is no outside of the universe. But I've got to draw a picture, so that's why I've done it. Okay. So imagine the whole universe as a three-dimensional TV screen. Now, that whole screen is actually the field of energy. It's the field of energy of the whole universe. That's what it represents. And imagine that field or that screen has pixels. Now, you know, a normal TV has little pixels, tiny little dots. And those little pixels change color. They each change color. They each got some information going into them, which shows up as a different color. And over the whole screen, that's what presents the whole picture. That's how TVs work. Well, imagine that the whole universe is doing that, basically. So the pixels of the universe are animated by acacia flow. The flow of non-physical information, that's what's animating everything. So if we take a person, for example, person is part of the universe, isn't it? We're all part of the universe. So our bodies are being animated by the flow of acacia. So think about all the little pixels which are part of a human body. And if we look a little bit closer, at akashic information, you can't look at it, to be honest with you, because it's non-physical, but we can try and visualize it. And the best way of visualizing it is circles. Circles, because a circle is an infinite loop. It's just a representation, basically. And each one of these little circles you can see inside of it is actually what is often called the flower of life pattern. And really, that's just a load of circles within circles. So it's a good way of representing acacia. So the acacia flow, these infinite non-physical circles, you could say, are manifesting a human body. So non-physical, acacia is non-physical, and the body is physical. It's manifesting. And as you can see here, that includes molecules as well. The molecules within the body also have pixels and are being manifested. Everything in the human body is full of pixels being manifested. Now, the male organ can manipulate the acacia. It can change the flow of acacia, which kind of means it can change reality. It can change the actual flow of reality around us before it even manifests. That means it can move molecules around if it wants. It can create molecules. I mean, theoretically speaking, it could turn this mouse into this phone. Don't think we'll ever do that, but it's possible because these are all being manifested through akashic information. So if you can change the akasha, you can change reality. Now, let's just try and understand a little bit how it might do that, because it's very important for us to understand it for it to work. Now, let's go back to the language of akasha, because akasha is information, and it's information arranged in a certain way, which we can call a language. Now, we've done this in a couple of lessons before, haven't we? Now, the language actually is part of this universal trinity diagram. That's what the language actually is. So this cycle of non-physical source, akasha in red, goes to energy in yellow, back to non-physical source in blue. That's a cycle. That's what the universal trinity is. It's a cycle. Think about it as a circle, a universal trinity circle. Think about it in those terms. So let's go back to the flower of life, which is our representation of akasha. All of these circles, lots of circles within circles. So let's say that each one of those circles is a UT cycle. This is how the language is arranged, basically. And you can go even further and say, well, each one of those circles is made of lots of smaller circles. Think about it like that. Those circles, almost infinitely, all these different circles within circles. That's how you can imagine that akasha is actually constructed. And then if you think of each tiny little circle as a letter, then you can imagine that the arrangement of those letters forms the language. Now, the male organ can change the language. That's what we're saying here. It can rearrange the language and change the flow of akasha. And if you wanted to go even quicker, say if you're moving molecules around the body, if you're creating molecules, if you're changing molecules, and if you wanted to go even quicker, then think about it in this way. Those circles there are a certain size. Think about the size of those circles corresponding to the speed or the rate of change. And then all you have to do is make them smaller. Make those circles smaller, and that will increase the speed. This is just a way of trying to understand how the male organ can work. And you might ask, when would we use this as opposed to the Rasaja membrane method, would be a question. Well, the Rasaja membrane method we know can help us with research. So that's one thing. Other than that, I'm going to call it a work in progress, because we are still developing this and trying to understand how it works and in what situations it might be used. So in summary, akasha flow method works by altering the akasha which generates everything. Therefore, it can manipulate, move, or create anything in the body. And it works through non-physical reality. Therefore, nothing is sent from A to B. Nothing is sent from person to person. Distance is an illusion here. It works through non-physical reality, which is everywhere and nowhere. So it's connected to every other part of the universe itself. Okay, any questions about that bit? Yes. Yes, but don't forget that that is just a way of trying to understand how it works, because akasha doesn't, you can't, it's non-physical. So, you can't quite imagine it. You can't visualize it. It's not actually made of circles. It's just a way for us to try and see it basically. So, first of all, we think that the akasha flow method only appears after the negative cycle. That's one thing, which is a good 7 years or so. So I think there's always going to be this mixture of different types of energy healing being used by our higher minds. And then you've got the research aspect. So the Rasaja membrane will be better for research because it's detectable. That's a very good question, which I'm not sure we know the real answer to yet, to be honest with you, because we'll find out more as we progress. Now, the first answer would be no, no control, because through the negative cycle, it's all about surrender and letting go of any control. And you don't have any control. Your higher mind takes over. So to start with, there's no control in terms of what we normally think of as control, the lower mind making decisions and having control of things. But gradually, the lower mind disappears. And then control starts to come in a little bit. And we're going to talk about that in a bit in this lesson in Akashic Self-Healing, about making choices and taking control. And you could say that that is the source taking control. But then ultimately, let's take it a step further. Ultimately, it's all predetermined anyway. So there is no real control. It's more a case of you are becoming aware of what is happening. The source is becoming aware of what it's doing. So later on, I don't know whether we will have the illusion of actual choice. Oh, let's use it for that. Let's use that for that. I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to wait and see what happens there, really. But ultimately, there is no choice because it's all predetermined. But anyway, we're going to talk about that more at the end of this lesson. Right. Well, okay. So it's an interesting topic. It's a fascinating topic, actually. And of course, there are a lot of hoaxes, but there are also some real ones. And I think that they are being produced by celestial avatars, various celestial avatars, with their Maya organ. So it's a very topical, really, to bring it up, to be honest with you. So I think it's the Maya organ that is used to manipulate things like that. Basically, that is manipulating matter, isn't it? And some of those circles are so intricate and have such metaphorical meanings that actually, it's very difficult to imagine that they're a hoax. And some of them have huge meanings for the global awakening as well. So I think that some of them are coming through some of our friends, our celestial avatar friends, and they're using a male organ to do it. All right, then. Shall we have a little break then? All right. Nice one. See you in a bit then. No worries. Right then. So we have talked about the Maya organ. We've talked about the Maya healing, which there are two methods of, Rasaja membrane and Acacia flow. Now we're going to talk about the other type of advanced healing, and that is called Akashic self-healing. Here we're not talking about sending healing to somebody else here. We're talking about a type of self-healing, and this is a type of self-healing only for people going through the self-realization process. It's a specific type of self-healing that you go through naturally through the process of self-realization. And in fact, you could even call this self-realization healing, because it is the process of self-realization. But it's really important that everybody going through this understands it and goes through the process, because it's kind of like the source becoming aware of what it's going through in a way. But it is a type of healing that the source applies to itself. Now, to understand this, again, there's a little bit stuff to go through. Now, do you remember in one of the last lessons, I think it was on intuition, I think we did an exercise to try and see the inside of a ninth chakra. And lots of people got some very interesting visions, and there was some reproducibility around those visions. So everybody, or quite often, in many of the visions that people were seeing, there were similar aspects. So now we're just going to look inside the ninth chakra and understand what's going on in there first, before we can talk about Akashic healing. So remember, there are two different types of Acacia. One type of Acacia, which is the universal Acacia, which is generating the whole world, the whole universe. And then there's this second type, which is coming down from your ninth chakra. It's a different type of Acacia. So that's what we're talking about now. And that's what Akashic self-healing has to do with. So let's look inside it. Now, when you ask for a vision and look inside the ninth chakra, your high mind can represent it to you in whatever way it wants to, really. So it doesn't matter too much how we see the inside of a ninth chakra. And in a minute, when we go even further into the non-physical bit, then it doesn't matter at all because it's non-physical. You can't see it anyway. So inside the ninth chakra, you've got a non-physical core, which is that little black dot in the center. And then you've got these consecutive spheres, which are layered to the outside. And that bit's physical. It's when I say physical, I'm talking about form. It's made of energy, subtle energy. I'm not talking about matter here, of course. So things come out of the non-physical core. Things are produced out of nothing, out of the non-physical core. And then you get these little strings or filaments that come out of the non-physical core. And a lot of people in their visions saw filaments of some kind in their visions. And, it gets to the first sort of ring or sphere. Now, I see this as a kind of electric, I can't remember the names of them, electric globes. You know those electric globes that you get there's electricity that's going to the outside of the glass dome, and you put your finger on it and all the electricity goes to your finger. Sorry? It might be that. Yeah, I'm not sure. But you know what I mean? It's a glass dome, and in the center there's an electrode, and then electricity is just sort of like a little lightning bolt is coming out to the edges. That's kind of the way I see it inside there. And the filament is coming out, which is the start of the Akashic stream. It's coming out to that sphere. And then there's another one, and then another one, basically. So it's kind of generating the Akashic stream, really. And then that is gathered on the outside layers and then passed downwards to the eighth chakra. And that's on its way down to you, basically. So that's how the Akashic stream is generated. Now let's have a look inside the non-physical bit, because this is the really important bit here. Now, inside this non-physical bit, it doesn't look like anything because it's non-physical. Again, we've just got to try and visualize it somehow. And I find the best way of visualizing it is through a flow or a flow of information from the center to the outside. And in the center, it's infinite. It's infinitely being created. And on the outside edge, it's being manifested into energy. That's when it becomes the Akashic stream. Now, when you look closely at this flow, you can actually see that it's made up of information, but it kind of, I think, looks like a spinal column. Or you could say that it looks like DNA, and I think somebody got this through in their vision last time, saw DNA. Because DNA is information, and it's kind of like the backbone of the information, or the blueprint to the material body. Well, the Akashic spinal column is also the backbone of your Akashic stream. So there's these reproducible concepts throughout the universe, I think, and DNA or a spinal column is kind of like one of those things. The Kundalini system looks quite similar, doesn't it? So in Akashic self-healing, this is the bit that we're interested in, this Akashic spinal column. Now, when you're going through the negative cycle of the process, I'll talk about that in a second, but when you're going through that, you could say that the language of that Akasha is this universal Trinity diagram. Now, do you remember I think we've talked about this before in the Universal Trinity lesson. We talked about how there's two diagrams, actually. There's one which represents a universe in suffering, which is this one. And if you look closely, I won't show you now, but when you look closely at this diagram, there's suffering inside it. There's positive and negative energy, and there is suffering inside this diagram. There's also a unification process, the pink bit in there. Unification process leads to this diagram. This is the self-realized universe. And this has no suffering in it at all, if you remember. This is the type of language which has no suffering in it. So Akashic self-healing is this process here. Going from the language of the universe in suffering to the language of the self-realized universe. And that is the Akasha which is coming down from your ninth chakra. That's what we're talking about here. And everything that's coming down from your ninth chakra is what controls everything that you're doing, everything that you're experiencing, everything you're feeling. All that is coming through your ninth chakra. So Akashic self-healing is about changing the language from one to the other. But how do we do that is the question. So let's go through each one of these points in turn. Let's start at the top. So the process of self-realization, which starts at the end of the Kundalini awakening phase and carries on in cycles. There is a negative cycle of 7 years. Then there is a positive cycle of 7 years. Then there is a unification cycle of 7 years. Now, the reason why we feel these cycles is because of metaphors. They are metaphors for how the universe works. It's a metaphor for the UT diagrams, which I'll get to a little bit more in a second. But basically, when you go through self-realization, you've balanced your karma, haven't you? Through spiritual evolution, you've balanced your karma, which is the duality, balancing duality. And then at the end of the Kundalini awakening phase, you clear away all your remaining karma. Now, the karma is held in the outside layers of the energy body. And the reason why you clear it all away in the first phase of self-realization is because you have to go through an energetic transformation. So you can't have that karma left in your energy body. Everything's got to be transformed. You've got to get rid of it, basically. So in the first phase of self-realization, you just wipe away all that karma. Now, the thing is, the source has to feel the effects of that karma. It can't just wipe it away because part of self-realization is the unification process. It means the source has to feel an equal amount of negative and positive. And if you're going to wipe away that karma, basically what happens is you get this karmic debt. And that karmic debt is what produces the cycles of the process. So the 7-year negative cycle is produced by the karmic debt of the negative karma that you wiped away. And then the positive one is produced by the positive karma or positive karmic debt, basically. But feeling this debt is like a metaphor. Now, this is where you have to use a bit of abstract thought because it's very difficult to really pin down. You know, this is how the universe works. It's constructed out of metaphors. There's metaphors everywhere. Akasha itself is a language of metaphors. Now, the source going through the process is feeling this karmic debt as a metaphor for the unification process in the Universal Trinity diagram. It's the balancing of duality, basically. So that means that the negative cycle is a metaphor for the suffering in the Universal Trinity diagram. Now, throughout the negative cycle, things are put in your way to trigger that debt. And we all know this very well, don't we? Because we know that triggering is a part of the self-realization process. It's a negative cycle. That could be internal, constantly internal triggering. It can be external as well, things happening in your life to trigger you. We can trigger each other even. as part of a kind of like a soul agreement works, but it's more in acacia really. But we're all linked. Everybody going through this process is all linked in a certain way. Now, akashic self-healing is all about cutting the metaphorical links, using the male organ to cut the metaphorical links between the Universal Trinity and your akashic spinal column. Your akashic spinal column inside your ninth chakra. That's what's producing everything that you experience. You can cut the links between that and the Universal Trinity. They're metaphors, but the male organ can do that. So what do we actually do, though? Well, we write a shit list, basically. And really, this is just the source becoming aware of everything. So first of all, it's not like you're going to apply this in some way with the male organ. Applying it is writing this list, and it will happen when it's ready. So you make a shit list, basically. It's a list of everything that's wrong in your body or in your experience, everything that bothers you. And this could be anything in the material body. This could be anything psychological, thought, or this could be emotional, how you're feeling. It could be anything at all. And everybody's shit list is going to be completely different. But you need to understand everything, first of all, by writing it down. So you explain in your list, you explain in detail how these things are happening in you, how they occur and what the cause is, if you know what the cause is. And if you know how it could be healed, then write that down as well. And it's whatever you feel should be on the list, by the way. There's no right or wrong answers to this. Now, as your karmic debt runs out, you'll be allowed to cut those metaphorical links. And this is a process that happens over the negative cycle, really. So it might start before the end of the negative cycle. Quite often the negative cycle can get less and less and less as you go through it. But it's all about the karmic debt. As the karmic debt runs out, you'll be allowed to cut those metaphorical links. What you're actually doing here is restructuring the akashic spinal column. Any questions so far before I carry on? Basically, what you've got to assume here is that everything negative that you feel in your life is coming from your karmic debt. And you need to write it down to understand it properly so that you can then change your akashic stream, because you need to change your akashic stream to go into the positive cycle. Absolutely. That is exactly what we're talking about. And that would fit under the category of psychological and emotional. Absolutely. And you know where that comes from as well, don't you? You know that has a past life route to it. So that goes on your shit list. You explain in detail how it occurs, what triggers it, and why, and the cause. If you know the cause, write it down. Absolutely. And then you restructure the akashic spinal column. Now, just to remind you here that the male organ can change the nature of acacia. That's why the male organ is used for this. And it's this new language that we want to use. Don't worry, you don't have to do all this. You just have to be aware of it. This will happen naturally as you go through the process. You don't actually have to literally do it. You just know about it. It's about awareness. The source has to be aware of this through you, basically. So this is the new language that you're going to use and restructure the akashic spinal column to leave the negative cycle behind and move into the positive cycle. So now we write a wish list instead. So you've written your shit list, and now you write a wish list. Now, what this is just a list of how you think you should be functioning in an ideal world, really. And think about it in terms of your purpose, your higher purpose, your self-realized purpose. What do you need to be able to fulfill your role as a day avatar? And this is just an example. This is one I did. And you got the akashic spinal column there, and I've separated it out into 3 sections: perception, functioning, and knowledge. Now, don't worry too much about what the contents are here. Everybody's will be different, and there's no right or wrong, and you can put whatever you want in this, basically. So, for example, in perceptions, I've put, of course, in a self-realized state, you need to be aware. Your identity needs to be universal awareness. Needs to feel deep peace. Still need your material senses. You still need you need full astral and energy senses, and so on, basically. But yours might be completely different to this, just so you're aware. It's just an example. Body functioning, you need to write down how your body should function. You can be pretty general about this, basically. You don't have to write in detail, otherwise you'll be there for years. It's more about understanding what's going on and understanding that the ninth chakra is controlling all of these body functions, basically. And knowledge. There needs to be a certain amount of knowledge comes through from the ninth chakra. Whatever knowledge you need to know to fulfill your role. Full past incarnation memories, for example. That's something that will definitely happen, I think, to everybody going through self-realization. Now, one thing to mention here is that this is different from desire. This is not desire. This is not, I want this, I want that, because this is past the point of desire. This is not the lower mind that is wanting something. Desire disappears as you go through the negative cycle. It goes along with the journey of surrender, and the lower mind is getting flattened out, and all those type of things are getting removed completely. This is more a recognition of what is needed as you move into the positive cycle of self-realization. And you leave the negative cycle behind, you move into the positive cycle. Now, last thing I want to mention here really is the illusion of control. You could think of this as a way of the source taking control of itself. The source itself goes through suffering for the purpose of awakening. Once it's awoken to itself, there is no more need for suffering. So this is kind of like the source realizing that everything that is causing its suffering is now coming through its own akashic stream. So it's going to use the male organ to restructure it and stop that suffering. So you could say that the source is taking control of itself there. However, that's still a bit of an illusion, of course. The source really just needs to be aware of the process itself, because ultimately everything is predetermined. We know that already, don't we? The universe is predetermined. It's infinitely deterministic. So the source was always going to do this anyway. Looking back in the past, the source was always going to do it. So it's still predetermined. It's a bit tricky to get your head around this sometimes, that you are taking control over the flow of akasha, but you're always designed to do it anyway. And as a final head spinner, think about what is prompting the source or you to change its own akashic stream. Well, the instructions to do it have to come through the akashic stream in the first place. So you are changing your own akashic stream, restructuring it completely, but the instructions come from the akashic stream in the first place. So control is a bit of an illusion. So in summary, for akashic healing, nice and easy. Write a shit list, write a wish list. That's all you got to do. And that's actually the assignment for this lesson. But it is also, a long process as well. This writing your shit list and your wish list, and then updating it as you go, year after year, until you get out of the negative cycle and into the positive cycle. And it will still carry on, because the shit list is all about the negative cycle, and the wish list starts in the positive cycle, really. There we go. Any questions? Right. Well, I think first of all, I think what we'll probably apply that to will be in recipients of healing. So it will be a way of trying to detect energy healing which is from the healer to a recipient. So it will be another way of detecting or verifying the use of magnetic enzymes, basically. So detecting the Rasaja membrane in the cells of a recipient of healing, basically. I think that's what we're talking about there. And as it's carbon atoms, that's going to be very easy to detect very quickly, rather than trying to detect magnetic enzymes, which is going to take a lot longer in the process of research, because that's made of magnetic energy, and we haven't developed a way of detecting that yet. So it's almost like the Rasaja membrane could be the first thing that we discover that leads us on our way to having evidence for energy healing. I mean, there's other stuff that we're going to measure, like biomarkers, for example. The changes that occur in the body due to the healing, and the results of the healing, of course. But the carbon atom thing is the first tangible big milestone, I think, in proving that how it's actually doing it. Basically. Yeah, I know. That's a good point to bring up, because let me just give everyone a bit of context here as well, because we have been thinking for quite some time now that the negative cycle, or the phases of the cycles of self-realization, are going to evolve. And we can't get this intuition out of our heads that every time a person comes out of the negative cycle, it has an impact on everyone else in the network. It has an impact on everyone else going through it as well. And it gets less. The negative cycle gets less slightly for everybody every time somebody goes out of the negative cycle. And what you've just mentioned there is maybe something to do with that. Maybe it will change. Maybe as we learn more, it's going to be possible to either reduce the time frame or reduce the severity. I guess I kind of feel like the time frame's fixed, because the 777 thing is a massive metaphor. 7 is the number of self-realization in the universal trinity. It's a huge metaphor going on there. But I wonder if the severity gets less and less and less over time in some way. And maybe it's something to do with this restructuring, or learning more about how to restructure the acacic spinal column. But again, this is all, we're learning as we go, really, aren't we? It's all evolving. Yeah, I wouldn't say that the source is not all knowledge. The source itself is not, is only awareness. It is pure awareness. It is universal awareness. That's the source. Knowledge itself is information, which then becomes conscious. So the source can only know things through conscious beings in the universe. The source can only know things in a self-realized way through the process of self-realization. No, it's the source itself. The universal awareness is not like a being out there with its own mind and its own knowledge banks or anything. It's not really like that. The source itself is awareness, and it goes on a journey of knowing itself. That's the journey of life. So really, it's learning all the way through, you could say. But awareness itself is just aware. It's just awareness. It hasn't got a knowledge bank until you get to self-realization, where conscious beings in the universe start being aware of themselves as the source. That's the first step there. The source becomes aware of itself through conscious beings. That's self-realization. And then the source can then start to understand itself more. This is why knowledge is a part of self-realization. First, the source becomes aware of itself. Then it starts to understand itself. But it needs the awareness filter to do that. It needs conscious beings in the universe to do that. It needs life. That's how the universe becomes aware of itself and starts to know itself. So the knowledge, that's why it's so important that everything that we do, we become aware of in a knowing way, because that's what the source has to do. And that works with healing as well. Non-intention healing, it works. But the healer has to become aware or have the knowledge, and then it starts to work properly. That's not even the last step there. The knowing, it's becoming aware of itself, and then having knowledge about itself. That's not the last step of self-realization. There's another step: communicating with itself. That's the next step. So the source actually starts to communicate with itself, and that's what akashic telepathy is all about. But that's a whole other story and a whole other conversation, really. Okay, so akashic knowledge itself comes from your ninth chakra. So akasha is generated in the ninth chakra, and it's fed down into your system, and through that you can get knowledge on all sorts of things. Basically, that gets fed into your filter, your awareness filter, and that's where it becomes knowledge, because it's information. That's where it starts as akashic information. Then it comes down your akashic stream. Then it's made conscious in your awareness filter. That's when it becomes knowledge, but that's the source knowing that information. And any information can come through the ninth chakra, but it's being generated out of nothing. It's almost impossible to actually understand this, to be honest with you. To understand it properly, you can't understand non-physical reality, because our minds are not designed to understand it properly, to be honest with you. No being in the universe will ever understand the source using thoughts. There is a brick wall. And that's why the only way to understand the source is through experience. So that's why you have to realize your true self. You have to experience the source. You can understand it that way, but you can't think about it. Akashic information can be turned into knowledge, and we can write lots of descriptions about the source, which is what we're trying to do. But ultimately, there'll be a brick wall in your mind, and you can't actually understand it until you just let go of trying to understand it through thoughts, and that's where you experience it. Well, to be honest with you, I think that there is only one perception of the source. You could, in fact, say, so you're talking about subjectivity versus objectivity here. Like, subjectivity is everything could be perceived a different way. Everything's subjective. Whereas the source, I would say, is the only objective thing in the universe. It's the only thing that looks the same no matter where you look at it from or who you are. So I think that awareness itself is the same. We experience it the same in everybody throughout the universe. Yeah. You're leading us down some fascinating paths. I'm not going to call them holes. They're paths. All right, shall we call it a day then? So that was the last theory lesson, and there's only a few lessons left really. And next week we're going to be doing a case study. We're going to be doing an asthma case study. A couple of lessons on case studies. All right, let's call it a day then, and have a good week. I'll see you next week then. Bye bye.